Hey guys, this is Miss Thomas speaking. Welcome to the asynchronous recording for Business Math A Unit 2. We're going to look at two select topics today. From Lesson 7, we're going to look at solving problems involving simple interest, and then compound interest from Lessons 8 and 9. And specifically, we'll be looking at using the compound interest formula. Remember that if you want to see more examples, especially examples of concepts from lessons that I haven't listed here, you can watch the full Unit 2 video, optionally no credit given for that, in the recording library. Let's get started with Lesson 7, solving problems involving simple interest. So, a couple of things that we'll need to know when we're solving problems with simple interest. First, remember that the principal is the amount of money earning interest. Another way of thinking about principal, it's the amount of money that's initially or originally in the account. So if it says Natalie deposited $5,000 into a savings account, $5,000 would be my principal amount. Annual interest rate is the percent of the principal earned as interest in 1 year. It's often abbreviated APR, and you'll see this APR come up quite a bit in our problems. Interest is the amount of money paid for the use of a lender's money. So basically, as you know, most of the time when we take out money, when we take out a loan, especially from a bank or some other lender, we are given a loan, but we're asked to pay interest, which is kind of like a convenience fee. Since they let us borrow the money, we have to pay back that money plus a little bit extra. And that's how that business works on their side. And again, interest is a concept you'll see again and again in this unit. It's the amount of money paid for the use of a lender's money. And there are many different types of interest. Remember that today we're focusing on two types, which are simple interest and compound interest. Now, simple interest from Lesson 7 is interest that you pay only on the original principal. When we get to compound interest, we'll discuss that and how it's different from simple interest. Now, all of these terms will make more sense as you start to practice with the simple interest problems. So let's get right into it. First, let's review the simple interest formula, which is I interest equals PRT, or principal, times rate times time. So one more time. I interest, that amount of money that is being earned on top of the money that was borrowed, is equal to P principal, the original amount of money in the account, times the interest rate, of course written as a decimal, times the time. And an important thing to know for this formula, when we're talking about simple interest, time is in years. Time is in years. So even if the problem gives you a figure of time in months, in days, in whatever it is, we have to convert it to years to do our calculation. And this has to do with the fact that we're using a rate that is based off of the annual rate, the APR, okay? Not important that you know that piece of it. The only important thing regarding time is that you know that regardless of how the time is presented to you, you need to convert it to years when you plug it into the interest formula. Let's look at a couple practice problems. Vikram deposits $500 in a savings account at Bank of America. The account pays an APR of 2.6%. He makes no other deposits or withdrawals, and after 6 months, we want to know how much simple interest has his money earned. So our first step, of course, is to identify what is the goal of this problem. Well, we can see that we're being asked to figure out how much simple interest does the account earn. So that's our cue to grab our simple interest formula. Now I'm just going to plug in each piece accordingly. So I would just go left to right so you can see that the first variable that pops up is principal. So I'm going to read the text and find the principal. Remember that the principal is the amount of money that we start out with. And I see that it says he deposited $500. So my principal is 500. Next, our rate. My rate is, it says an APR of 2.6%. But of course I needed to convert that to a decimal, which would be 0.026. Hopefully at this time you're really comfortable with converting between percent and decimal form. If not, please reach out to me. I'm not going to go into the details about percent to decimal in this video. And then finally, time. So, okay, it says that he did this deposit and we're wanting to know what happens after 6 months. So our time is 6 months, but remember that I said we have to convert our time to years. So how much of a year is 6 months? Well, it's half a year, right? So you can write this a couple different ways and it'll all turn out the same. So you can think of this as being 6 months out of 12. Notice that when I simplify, that'll simplify to 1/2. So if it's convenient for you to think of this as, oh yeah, I know 6 months is half a year, you can plug in 1/2, or you can plug in the number of months that passed divided by the total months in a year to figure this out. Either way is fine because these ratios are equivalent. This is the number one mistake I see in simple interest. This is actually the reason why I chose this topic. Students seem to have a pretty generally good understanding of what interest, principal, rate, and of course I know that you know what time is, but understanding time in the context of this equation is sometimes difficult, and sometimes it's just a matter of you forget, right? So that's why we're practicing this. Now, once you have determined what all your variables are, we're going to plug them into the equation. So you can see I end up with my $500 principal times my rate in decimal form times my time in years. I plug that into a calculator and simplify, and I find that my interest is $6.50. So he deposited $500 into his account, and 6 months later, it had earned another $6.50 in interest. Let's look at another example. The principal on Raphael's saving account is $2,200. The APR is 3.8%. What is the simple interest after 146 days? So once again, I can see that they're asking me to find simple interest. That's my cue to grab the simple interest formula. Let's start identifying our pieces of the formula. So first, what is my principal? Well, it's $2,200. What's my rate? Well, it's 3.8%, but of course, I'm going to convert that to a decimal of 0.038. And then my time, of course, we know is the trickier one. It says 146 days. So how am I going to convert this into a year? Well, just like when you think back to the last slide, to convert 6 months into a year, I took 6 months, the number of months that had actually passed, and I divided by 12, the total number in a year. I'm going to do the same thing with days. I'm going to take the total number of days that have actually passed, 146, and I'm going to divide by 365, the actual number of days in a year. Okay? That is the biggest difficulty, I think, of this problem. Once you get that, once again, it's a matter of plugging into our calculator. I chose to simplify this. When I did the division, I got 0.4, so that's why you're seeing that 0.4 here. To me, that seemed easier, and it seemed like a way to minimize mistakes in case when I typed all this stuff in, I might hit a wrong button, right? So I thought I'll simplify this first before plugging it into the interest formula. You can do it all in one step if you want to. So when I plug in and simplify, I get interest equals $33.44. So Raphael would have earned $33.44 in simple interest. And one more general comment, I know that I'm doing the calculations because I'm making sort of an assumption that you're comfortable plugging this stuff into your calculator. I really encourage you to follow along and plug everything into your calculator as you go, just to make sure that you are, using the functions correctly. And please reach out to me if you do find that you're having trouble with calculator settings. Let's do one last example. Now, let's read it. It says Fantine earned $211.60 in simple interest. Right away, they've given us simple interest. We know this problem is going to be a little bit different than what we've done so far. But it says she earned the simple interest in 2 years at an annual interest rate of 4.6%. And this time, the question is not what her simple interest is, it's how much did she invest? How much did she invest? Or in other words, what's the amount of money she started with? And hopefully your brain is lighting up and saying, oh, they're asking for principal. The goal of this problem is to figure out what her principal balance was. Okay, but we can still use the simple interest formula. And here's how I would suggest looking at the context to recognize this. So notice first of all that they just mention simple interest outright. So that's a clue you might need the simple interest formula. But they also mentioned time, rate, and principal. So even though I'm not solving for simple interest, all of the components of the formula were mentioned, okay? And remember that if I have any three of these four variables, I can solve for the one I don't know, right? I might have to rearrange the equation like we'll be doing in this example. But again, if I know three of the four variables, I can pretty quickly solve for the one unknown. Okay, so what information did they tell us? Well, they told us that the interest is equal to 211.60. Principal, we don't know. That's what we're trying to figure out. Rate is 4.6%, which of course will convert to a decimal as 0.046. And finally, time. Well, this time they actually gave it to us in years, so we don't need to do any sort of conversion. Time is just 2 for 2 years. So let's set this up. So just like before, I'm going to take the equation and I'm going to plug in everything I have. Remember, this time we're solving for principal. So I will have to rearrange things just slightly to solve for p. I would recommend first simplifying this step. Just do the multiplication just to make it a little bit easier on yourself. Okay, and then we end up with this. From here, I recommend our final step just of course being to isolate p, isolate our variable by getting rid of that constant. Since p is being multiplied by 0.092, I'm going to divide both sides of the equation by that constant to isolate p, and I get that p equals $2,300. So this makes sense. This seems like a reasonable answer when I think about the amount of interest that accrued and the interest rate. It makes sense that my principal is going to be considerably higher. In general, you can expect the principal to be higher than the interest, much higher than the interest, unless we have a really big interest rate, unless that interest is accruing at a big rate, or unless it's been accruing for a very, very long time as regards simple interest. Okay, so Fantine would have earned or Fantine would have originally invested $2,300.